So making a transition to Sherry and Boyan, we're going to talk about uses and gratifications very briefly. Essentially, uses and gratifications is attempting to explain the selection and effects of media. According to uses and gratification, expectations about media are formed by social. So this would be something in terms of using media as some sort of social source of information, or as bonding, or psychological. So in order to improve maybe your mood or your happiness, or create some sort of emotional state, and that leads to different patterns of use. So depending on what your specific uses are, so what do you use media for, that might lead you to select different forms of media. So if you're using media for information, you might be more likely to increase your newspaper consumption or social media consumption, and then that might gratify different needs that you have. The major assumptions of uses and gratification are that media is motivated. This means that media use is motivated. This means that viewers essentially are selecting their media purposefully. It is used to fulfill needs, as mentioned before, so I won't go much more into that, but essentially, not only are we motivated to select media, but we do it because we need it for some reason. Media use and needs are affected by individual differences, so there will be differences based on region, race, gender, etc. that lead to different needs and thus different use based on media users' specific needs. So people in Europe might not have the exact same needs and thus not the same media use as people in the United States. There are always alternatives to media use, so uses and gratifications does not assume that media exists in a vacuum, which helps to explain why media can be used for a social function, but also not used if there is a more functional alternative that is satisfying for the user. And then finally, as active users, people have more powerful influence than media on overall effects. So essentially, people in uses and gratifications and their individual uses are driving the patterns of media use and the gratifications and that are gained by content and exposure. The major motivations that are named as both central to uses and gratifications gained by media are for entertainment. This primarily refers to many of the psychological needs that were referenced before, and might hint at media use as arousing, creating escapism or diversion from and distracting from something else that might be stressful. It might also just be used as a pastime for when there is not something else to do. So these can both be kind of uses and gratifications. Media can also be used and can gratify social interactive functions. So watching sports together, discussing content of your favorite show over a water cooler might be a major use and gratification for media, or parasocial interaction, character identification. So think about the happiness of watching, for me at least, Anthony Rizzo on screen, seeing that guy. He's one of my favorite players, maybe perceiving that I have some sort of relationship with him, and it makes me feel socially more worthy just because I'm able to expose myself. This is more likely to be seen in the case of things like soap operas and serial television shows, where you have a favorite character and you can kind of picture yourself having a conversation and interacting and just getting inside their head just while you watch them. Media can also be used for learning, so learning news, public affairs, surveilling your culture and things around them, and gathering information. Think about children's use of television, especially Sesame Street. This is a good way for children to learn about both society and functional goals. It's a good source of information. Some issues and criticisms, and there are plenty with uses and gratifications. This is a typically older theory that is seen as fundamental to the field of communication, but is not necessarily studied for the following reasons, which I will address. So one of the big criticisms that was mentioned in the paper was the fact that what is the difference between uses and gratifications? You might have even noted that I was kind of hedging my bets when I was talking about these things earlier. And it's true. There are very few differences in terms of separating out what a use of media is, what we go into media selection using, and then a gratification, what we get from it. To address this, more recent studies have been looking at the finite effects of media exposure. So the experience of maybe flow, which is essentially a pleasant state where you kind of lose sense of time while you're exposed to media, how that might be gratifying, or how media can gratify specific needs. In the book, it said self-determination theory. So how does media make us feel competent? How does media make us feel autonomous, like we have free will? And how does it make us feel related to others? Things like that. And then on the other side as well, people have taken a more finite look at what leads to selection. Is it certain arousal states? Is it certain elements about the content? What is it that makes us select something rather than something else? Second is a major criticism that cannot be addressed, and it's that there is such thing as habitual and ritualistic use. The thing that I always go to here is that I was a frequent crossword user for a long time until I kind of went cold turkey, but it was something that I enjoyed and certainly selected originally because I enjoyed doing a good crossword puzzle. But I woke up every day and I would do the New York Times crossword puzzle. And essentially it was just, you wake up, you have coffee, you do that, it gets your brain going. But that's a habit. And that kind of goes against one of the uses and gratifications assumptions that I'm an active user. Really, this was probably caused by a contextual cue and just something that was a habitual thing and a ritualistic part of my life, rather than something that on a day-to-day basis I was going out of my way to explore using. Again, this can't entirely be addressed unless you... it can't entirely be addressed. But certainly if you're interested in looking at habitual versus planned use, you have to acknowledge this and make sure that you're studying active users, people that are told to make decisions that they care about. And then finally, uses and gratifications is generally thought to be too focused on individuals. More recently, studies, and especially in the age of big data and social media, have been looking more at societal level differences that might be influenced by individual level gratifications that are gained, or uses or changes in media use, but certainly might also influence individuals themselves. So think about if many of your peers are using something, or if there's a major shift in the country, you might change what your uses and gratifications are in terms of media, and thus your media use. And now, as we have more access to data, we can actually look at this. So here's your references. I hope that you enjoyed this screencast, and I'm looking forward to, if you have any questions, feel free to email. You should be posting in the discussion, and if this is still Module 2, you should also be looking at your media diary, having good discussions, and again, looking forward to talking to you soon.